My name is Colin Hart. I'm a course director of digital audio production in the digital cinematography degree. This here is Rick Viers, author, superstar, sound recordist, all the above. Well, you think you're a superstar at least. Please welcome Rick Viers. And we'll attempt to be your entertainment for the evening. Tell me a little bit about how, first of all, you got into sound recording.
I actually went to Full Sail for the film program because I'm a filmmaker at Hart, and I just love everything about the film industry. And when I graduated from here, I moved up to Detroit, and I was looking for work. I wanted to start making money with my degree, and I couldn't find anybody that was hiring. And the only thing that was really available was they were using freelance sound mixers, guys that would go out and do location sound. So guys with the boom, the boom pole and the bag, and we would just run around and mix for, film and television shows. And that's kind of how I got started. Somebody said, hey, can you do sound? And I'm like, sure, yeah, absolutely. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, sure, of course I can. Guy's like, all right, well, we'll have you come in on Saturday. I'm like, all right. So then I raced home that night, and I pulled out all of my Full Sail manuals and my textbooks, and I'm reading, what the heck did I get myself into? And so I showed up early at the gig so I could figure out where the knobs were on the mixer, and I just completely bluffed my way through the first day because I learned enough at Full Sail about sound to be dangerous, and I knew enough, where I could at least get my way through the day. But the main thing was I paid attention. I was Johnny on the spot, and I just did my absolute best. And the people that I was working with were impressed enough that day that they were like, okay, well, we're going to use you next week as well. And next week I was working with ESPN doing stuff for the Red Wings, and then the week after that I think I was doing stuff with Good Morning America and shows like Hard Copy and Inside Edition. And it was just a matter of a few months before I was working all over town doing shows like that. And it was just because I was confident and competent and just did a good job. Yeah. Cool. And that just kind of spiraled into a career.
Awesome. So this panel is entitled Audio in Unusual Places. Now, you're a field recordist, sound effects recordist, sound editor, all of the above. Can you, for anyone who might be a little unsure of the definition, can you tell me just what a field recordist is and does?
I make noise. That's pretty much what I do. I mean, the bulk of my work is I create sound effect libraries. And those libraries are sold and licensed to anybody around the world, from big video game companies like EA Games to movie studios like Universal and Warner Brothers, all the way down to guys that are just working out of their spare bedroom, and they just need sound effects for whatever project they're working on. And so my job is to go out and gather sound effects, edit them down, master them, and in some cases just create things from scratch. So my goal is to make the most useful sound effects that I can that are as clean as possible. And then I have to catalog them so that they're as accessible as possible, because it doesn't help you to have a million sound effects if you can't find where they're at. So you have to make sure that all your metadata and your naming structures are done properly. So
cool. You go out there and buy a million sound effects tonight if you wanted to. Everybody sells sound effects right now. You've got Sound Dogs and Sound Ideas and all these little boutique guys. And what made you think that you could go out there and make something better or different and actually make a name for yourself in that?
Well, when I started, there weren't boutique libraries. There was only a couple of publishers, and I started off doing sound effects as a hobby just because I thought it was kind of cool. I had a SoundForge, and I was trying to, which is a DAW that I use, and I wanted sounds to play with. And so, long story short, I ended up just messing around with sound effects. And I wanted to get sound effects to put into the projects, the video projects and the movies that I was working on. And I really wasn't impressed with what was being produced out there. Now, I started off by going to the local store and getting the little $10 CDs. It's 101 sound effects for $9. And so I listened to them, and they were exactly what you would think they would get for $10. It was just not really good quality stuff. And then I was more interested in the professional libraries. And the professional libraries, I was fresh out of college, so money was tight, and they were really expensive. But I sent away you could get demos from them. And I'll never forget, there was one sound effect in particular that really kind of changed the course of my life, is that I listened to it, and it was from a major, sound effects producer, and it was a gunshot. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be awesome, man. This is a gunshot from Hollywood. This will be great. And you hear the gunshot, and then you hear the bullet trailing off, and then as it's decaying, you can hear like the guy reload the weapon, and then you hear him talking to his buddy, "Come on, Carl, let's go get a beer." Or, I don't know. There was some kind of chatter in the background. And I remember like literally sitting up going, wait a minute, that's not a very clean sound effect. I'm hearing all this garbage noise in the background. So I checked out some other sounds, and there were little things in the background going on. Like this is a door close, and you would hear the door close, and you hear like a dog bark off in the background, or just something that was totally disconnected to the original sound I was after. And I was a little frustrated because I was like, gee whiz, this stuff is pretty expensive for there to be all this kind of noise and stuff. And so I just started recording my own sound effects, and my goal was I want to create very clean, very isolated sound effects that were the most useful. Because if you're making sound effects for a film, there's a little bit of grace because it's going to be buried under a bunch of other stuff, ambience tracks, dialogue, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So there's a little bit more grace with what's in the background. But when you're making a sound effect library, my philosophy is it needs to be absolutely clean and pure, because I have no idea how it's going to be used in the end product. So my goal was, if I want a car door slam, I want to hear only the car door slamming. I don't want to hear birds, chirping in the background, or distant traffic noise, and all that kind of stuff. So I just went out and started recording, and bringing the stuff back into my studio, and then listening to what I was recording. And it was trial and error. I didn't mentor it. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't sit underneath anybody else and learn. It was all trial and error.
Cool. So through that whole process, you probably honed your hearing skills quite a bit, and listening skills in particular.
And my what?
Well, I fell for it once. I won't fall for it again. So tell me about an experience you might have had where if you hadn't honed those listening skills, you wouldn't have found a sound.
I think a lot of it was right off the get-go. When I would go out and record sound, the first thing I would do when I got back to the studio was I would play the sound back, listen to what I did right or wrong, see if I could do something better or if I liked the way I did it. And then I would immediately pitch the sound up, and then I would pitch it down. And then sometimes I would play it backwards. And I did that for years, and I still do it to this day, but for years and years and years, every time I would hear a new sound, I would play it really slow and then play it really fast, just so I could kind of get an idea of, okay, this is what this sounds in real life. This is what it sounds like. Now, if I slow it down, it's going to sound something like this. And then when you do that, you're like, well, you know what? If it's slowed down like this, it kind of sounds like this. And so I did that with, I don't know, thousands and thousands of sounds. And then after a while, your brain just kind of gets used to the idea of, nowadays when I hear something, I can pretty much get a good idea of what it's going to sound like if I slowed it down. And that helps me when I'm recording, because when I'm out in the field, if I hear something interesting in real time, I'm like, wait a minute, I know if I take that and slow that down, just by having that mindset, I'll record stuff that otherwise might be somewhat useless for most people, but I know, hey, that's a great source for something else. So it kind of helps me in the recording process. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, one thing that's been a point of contention amongst a few recordists is the whole headphones thing. How do you feel about headphones? For a little backstory, there are some recordists that like to...
We're not mentioning names, David Farmer, at all. I am not going to mention anybody, David Farmer.
Some people, I won't mention names.
I wouldn't either.
David Farmer.
David Farmer.
That don't like wearing headphones because they feel they can localize sound better without them on. So if you hear a sound, you can point. If you have headphones on and a mono mic, you have no idea where it's coming from. What are your feelings on that?
Well, I love David Farmer. No, here's the thing. Different strokes for different folks. You certainly can't argue with David because he's a genius, and the stuff that he produces is amazing. So it's like I'm not going to come against him. But my philosophy is that there is a lot of stuff that you just don't know what the mic is hearing. You know what I mean? So it sounds different in real life, and then it sounds different. Like what it sounds like in real life and what it sounds like through the microphone are sometimes two totally different things. So for me, recording without your headphones on is like, it's like taking pictures without looking through the viewfinder. You know what I mean? It's like I can point in the general direction and get an idea, okay, I'm shooting something like that, but it's different when I put my look through the actual viewfinder and get a better sense of what I'm seeing. Same thing with sound. Perfect example, I think I've told you this story before, but I was recording, and there was a blizzard a few years ago up in Detroit where I'm from, and it was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and there's just wind was going all over the place, and I'm like, oh wow, this is a great chance for me to go out and get some good wind sound. So I went out to the forest, and I sat out there for like an hour. My feet were like, I was frostbite and all this kind of stuff, and I was like freezing cold, but I was dying to get good wind, and this wind is blowing through the trees, and I was getting amazing sound, and but I really wasn't getting that like quintessential, that wispy, that's really what I was looking for, but I wasn't getting it in the woods. And after about an hour or so, I had to call it quits because I was freezing, and I walked back to the car, and I got my headphones on, and I always leave the recorder engaged because I want to listen to what the mic's getting, because it's just a habit, because you never know, you walk across something really cool. And the mic was on a mic stand, because I'm not going to sit there and hold the mic for an hour, right? So I have it on a mic stand. So I get back to the car, and I just set it down next to the car, and I go to grab my bag, and as soon as I go to grab my bag, I hear like the exact wispy wind I'm after. And I'm looking around, and I'm like, what the heck? And I have no idea where it's coming from. Then I realize, oh, it's the microphone is picking this up. And so I looked at the mic, and it just so happened that I set the mic right next to like the hatch of my car, like the crack of the hatch. And it just so happened it was like dead on. And the wind was blowing through the crack of the hatch and doing its thing and just kind of, spinning around and just getting spit back out. And the mic was there to capture it. And I just got like this amazing wind. So despite the fact that I was freezing, I stayed out for another, 15, 20 minutes and just recorded more, and just tons of that stuff. And then, of course, afterwards, I walked around the entire car looking for every possible crack and nook, and maybe it's here and maybe it's there. And yeah, it was only that one place. Actually, I think I may have gotten something on the one of the side mirrors, but it just so happened the direction the wind was blowing and the crack and the way the car was positioned, it just worked out perfectly. So that's one of those things where I would have left that recording session empty-handed without the wispy wind I was looking for, had I not worn headphones.
Right. And back to your previous statement, it can be a game of inches.
Yeah.
You hear it here and you don't hear it there. So, in my opinion, I agree. I tend to leave headphones on as much as possible.
Yeah.
Now, sounds like that are relatively easy to get. You go out and you find them. What about harder to get sounds? Like, say I wanted to get into some crazy factory or a military operation, record jets or whatever. I know you have a cool story about getting into GE and how long it took you to record, not GE, GM.
GM, General Motors, yeah.
And how long it took you to get into that, just to get some cool sounds.
Yeah, General Motors. So obviously in Detroit we have the big three, Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, and they're these big auto manufacturing plants. And they've got really cool machines and stamping plants and all this kind of stuff. And I tried to get in there for years, and you got to go through their PR departments, and it's always a pain in the butt. And now that I'm thinking about it, I can't even remember how I got in. I did a project with somebody who knew somebody or something like that. It was like somebody who knew somebody. And finally I got permission to go in, and they're like, yeah, we'll give you carte blanche. You can come in and just record whatever you want. And anytime I get the opportunity to go to a place that's really, really hard to get into, I milk it for all it's worth. I'll record way more stuff than I would ever need. I tend to do that in general. If I'm all the way out on a location, let's say I'm recording birds, I don't know, or something, and I just so happen there's construction vehicles nearby, well, I'm going to record construction vehicles too. I just milk every location for everything that I can, regardless if it's what I'm after at that time or not, because you're eventually going to need it someday, or why not have it? So we went out and we brought a couple of recorders, and we recorded, man, I can't remember if we were there for multiple days. We may have been there for multiple days, but we recorded these stamping machines, and some of these machines are like larger than this room and like 3 or 4 times as high as this room, just ginormous places, these machines themselves. And we recorded all kinds of motors, servo motors, like the robots that they've got, all kinds of tools and pneumatics. And there's really interesting, like the whole thing is like kind of like being in a Star Wars game. It's like all these kind of like you can see where they get the idea for some of the Star Wars places that they create for the video games, but it's just like being that, except it's they're manufacturing cars. So we just got an absolute ton of stuff, and the stuff worked great for what it was, a factory sound or a factory robot sound or whatever. But then I could take those elements and then loop and layer them, pitch shift them, do whatever I want to them, and then make all kinds of really cool sci-fi sounds out of them as well, or anything else I can think of.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I have to put a halls in, so you got to talk for a few minutes.
Okay.
How was your day?
My day's it's pretty good. I mean, any day with you is a good day.
You're welcome.
So you do a series, like a web series, where you document your escapades with
Is that what they are? They're escapades?
With you, they're escapades.
Make me sound saucy. Escapades.
And you've had some pretty crazy stuff. I've seen you coming out of a burning building with a microphone. I've seen you with a microphone that's on fire, shooting guns, tasing interns, interns tasing
That's a true story, too.
I don't know. Is Skittles even here?
He was here earlier. He's gone. Skittles is the name of the intern that I tased. But in all fairness, and he had me do it twice because he's that kind of guy. But in all fairness, I gave him the next time we went out. He got the bigger taser, and I told him he could tase me if he could catch me. He couldn't catch me.
He's waiting for one day. One day he'll catch
he
up.
gave up.
So you've done some crazy stuff, recording in crazy places. What's the most unusual place or thing you've recorded?
Oh, gee whiz. Given the topic of this panel, I probably should prepare for that question, huh?
Probably. I told you I was going to ask.
The most unusual. I don't know if there's like one thing that was the most unusual, or are you thinking of something that I should know? I don't know.
I mean, I know some pretty unusual things, but
unusual things. It's the weirdest, stupidest, smallest, littlest things that you think are like useless that end up being the coolest sounds. And it's like the really big things that you think are like, this is going to be awesome, and then you listen to it on playback and like, yeah, it's not that big. So it's like, I don't know. To me, it's like anything can be used to make anything else.
yeah.
When it comes to sound. In fact, let me play you guys a sound. Let me see if I can play this. I don't know if you guys have heard this one or not. All right, so what is this the sound of? Give it a minute, it's loading. Oh, I've got the spinning wheel of death.
I don't know.
It's still loading. All right, here we go. What is this? All right. Cover your ears, kids. All right, we're back.
Are we?
What is it? No.
Kind of sound.
Who said it? Chewbacca. Pitch down bear. Only you would watch Star Wars and going, yeah, I love the sound of that bear. It was a Wookiee. Captain Literal strikes again. That's okay. That's all right. You got a free copy of the Zombie Apocalypse stuff. You're crying. Okay, yes, it's Chewbacca, right? It's not. It's actually somebody opening. You guys can't see it. It's actually somebody opening and closing a cupboard door. Right? So the idea is that you can make anything can be used to make sound, So I'm a big fan of like taking things that, just taking things and just manipulating the heck out of them. Like, I'll take like little samples of sound, little like microseconds, and then I'll loop that and I'll play it backwards and I'll put some reverb on it, and then I'll flip it back again, then I'll pitch shift it down. I'll do like this like 20 or 30 times, and I'll be like, okay, that's a really cool sound. And then somebody will go, I like that. How did you make it? I'm like, I have no idea. Like, you have no idea. Like, that happens to me all the time. How did you make that? I don't know. I mean, I could probably make it again or something like it, but I like to manipulate the sounds to death. And I was telling some guys this earlier today, and it's so true. If you do what other people do, and you do the same techniques that other people do, you're going to get the same kind of sound that they're getting. Well, that's not very fun, because then you're just replicating what somebody else is doing. You want to be unique. You want to be yourself. You want to have your own sound, so to speak. And so I'm a big fan of not. I mean, I obviously. I have people that I definitely admire their work, but I don't try to emulate what other people are doing. I want to be unique and original and do things my way. So one of the processes that I do is I literally have no rules when I make a sound. I will just play with it until I like it, and then once I like it, I'm done and I walk away. But I don't have like, okay, it's got to be done this way, then I got to do this, and then I got to do this, and I got to do that. I just mess with it. There are certain things I'm always doing, like I'm always checking background. I gate a lot of stuff, and if I think it needs compression, I'll compress a little bit. EQ and all that kind of stuff. I tweak with that here and there, but I don't always have to do it the same way every single time. Just because I want to be able to just mess with it and make it my own. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Cool.
I didn't answer your question, did I?
No, that was a pretty unusual sound from an unusual place.
Yes.
So was that when you were doing the demolition stuff?
It's actually not me. That was somebody else that I found it online.
Oh, okay.
I was like, that's so cool. But it's like, that's the best way to illustrate that you can use sound for anything else. I mean, you thought it was a bear. you thought. That's okay. But everybody else on the planet thought it was Chewbacca. But the point is that it had sounded just like Chewbacca. Everybody hears that and they think Chewie, right? But it's just a door opening and closing. So you can, I used to make like spaceship doors, and some of them get used in projects and stuff like that. But like spaceship doors, like CD players and DVD players, opening and closing the little trays. We would take the motors and use those things, or we used to have 5-disc changers, and they would make all these signs. We would record those and then pitch them down and speed them up and make all sorts of cool stuff out of them.
Cool. I've been with this guy before where we were in a room and someone moved a table and Rick's like, don't touch it. Don't touch it. And then we had to have somebody guard the table because if you moved it, it might stop making the sound. Someone else goes and gets a recorder, bring it back, set it up. All right, now do that again. Start making
and it's much more dramatic than when I'm like, nobody move. I mean, like I get really freaked out, especially when it comes to things that like creak or like squeak, because after a while you wear the squeak out, right? And it's like a weird thing. I don't know. It's like you do it a few times, then the sound just goes away. So anytime I do it once, I'm like, and I get that golden moment. I'm like, nobody touch it. Everybody walk away. Look the other way. And then I'll get a recorder, and then you get those few good turns out of it before then the sound just kind of dies. Same thing with wood does it. And then doors are really weird. Sometimes you'll get a good creak on the door when it opens, but when it closes, it makes no sound. And then sometimes if you do it and you do it really slow, you'll get good creaks. And then sometimes if you lift up or pull down on the door a little bit, you'll get good creaks. And this is not just with doors. This is with anything. So you got to learn to like perform whatever it is that your prop it is that you're manipulating. So, dude, I'll lay on stuff. I'll squeak stuff. I'll have like my foot holding down one thing and my arm on another thing. And I'm just like, just the right sound. And you just play with it and tweak with it until you get exactly what you're after. Yeah.
Riding bicycles in circles with no tires on them.
Remember the hospital bed that we recorded?
Yeah.
Servo motors. So I love servo motors. So he had this hospital bed. It wasn't his, as far as you know. But he had this hospital bed, and it was one of those ones that, went up and down and back and forth and all sorts of stuff. And we recorded all of those motors, and I've used those. I think some of that stuff ended up in the Heroes and Villains superheroes library that we did. And we used those for like little gadgets on like, superhero gadgets, all that kind of stuff. And then we just took the hospital bed, we just sped them up really fast, and you get like these really cool like winding kind of motors and things. Yeah. So
tell me about the coolest thing that you've gotten to do in pursuit of a good sound. Like I know you've gone through a house with a sledgehammer, hitting everything you can find, and I've seen you walking out of a burning something with a microphone that was on fire. What else crazy have you done?
I mentioned this story in my book, but this is my favorite story. So, this was when I first started. This is a good story. Get comfortable. All right. So when I first started, I working on this library, and it was an impact effects library, so it was all like smashes and crashes and things. So I called up this local junkyard, and talked to the owner, and I said, I'd like to come in and I'd like to record smashing all of the junk that you have in your junkyard. He's like, okay, that sounds, like cool. come on in and do it. And I said, well, the only problem is there's a highway or something that was nearby. He said, I need to come in early in the morning before rush hour traffic picks up and before your guys come in to work at the junkyard. And he says, well, that's not a problem. I'll leave the gate unlocked. You can just come in. I said, I'd like to be there at like 4 in the morning. It gives me like 3 or 4 hours before everybody, the traffic picks up. He said, that's fine. Come on in. And I said, all right. I said, well, when I'm here, I need to know, what am I allowed to smash? And he looks at me and goes, you can smash anything you want behind this fence. And I'm like, oh, hell yeah. So me and my buddy came, we had these sledgehammers, and we demolished 75 cars, at least. And there was a Winnebago, like the RV camper. We went inside, we're smashing. It was like just because we could, we were smashing every single thing, throwing stuff, metal, creeks, anything we could do. We just obliterated the place. And about a year, and we used those stuff. In fact, some of those sound effects ended up on that library and with some other libraries that I did. And has anybody watched the Sons of Anarchy series? I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but the very last sound effect in the entire series, when the one thing happens, came out of that. Yeah. Everybody else is like, oh, you got to go watch the series to figure it out. But actually, several sounds in that show came from that library, and I did that library. Gee whiz, I don't know, 15, 16, 17, something years ago. Yeah. But it's like a year goes by, and then I had to go back. I needed to get some more crash sounds. So I call up the owner. I'm like, hey, Ron, this is Rick. He's like, hey, Rick. I'm like, hey, man, I'd like to come back and record more stuff at your junkyard. He's like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and have to pass on that this time. I'm like, wow, what's going on? He goes, well, it's not your fault, but I was restoring this car for my daughter. And as soon as he said it, I was like, I could actually hear tires, because I know exactly what he's talking about, because it was this purple Trans Am, like in the middle of the junkyard. And I remember looking at my buddy going, man, there is not a thing wrong with this car. Shapa, shapa. I mean, there was nothing. I'm like, look at this window. There's nothing wrong. Look at this headlight. We smashed everything on that car. The taillights. And I think at one point I opened up the glove box and just rattled everything around just to make sound. But we trashed the car, poor guy. And I'm like, well, dude, I asked for permission. He goes, that was my fault. So I wasn't allowed to go back in. I had to find another junkyard, which sucks because that was a really good junkyard. But so get permission before you record. But so I'll go into a junkyard, and I'll spend, several hours in there. We'll literally record thousands of hits and crashes and impacts and all these kinds of things. And then what I do is I bring them back to the studio, and then I painstakingly grab every single element, and I cut it out of the waveform. I'll actually cut it out of the file and then name it as its own file, and I'll call it, glass break or metal hit or door hit or, metal creak. And I'll come up with like hundreds of these things and hundreds of these things and hundreds of these things. And then from there, I bring them onto a timeline, and I just arrange them into these just symphonies of destruction, where I've got like, it sounds like maybe like a semi-truck rolling down a hill, or it sounds like a car crash, or like I've got all of these elements that it's kind of like, it's like composing a score, except you're just using like all of this crashes and chaos and mayhem. And then I'll grab in, okay, I need more glass. So I'll go to my glass folder and I'll grab glass and I'll paint it in, and then I'll grab some. I need metal creaks right here, and then the rhythm of maybe the car rolling or whatever it is I want. So I've got all of these elements. Well, I get all those elements because when I'm at the junkyard, I record it's just as much as humanly possible. Yeah.
Cool. So a day of heavy recording like that, how many usable sounds do you think you come out with on the other end?
Well, I mean, I'll come out with thousands of sounds. It doesn't mean I will use every single one of them, but sometimes I'll use, I might use them all, but they might end up like making 400 sounds or 100 sounds. It's just that this one sound has got 65 sounds from that pile, and this one sound's got 20 sounds from that pile. So then I just loop and layer and just make noise.
Cool. So a lot of people here are at the point in their lives where they want to start branching into doing something like this. In Orlando, there's a lot of fantastic places to go record. But on a student budget, when you're not buying $1,500 mics and $4,000 recorders, what kind of gear might you recommend to someone just starting out that wants to get their hands dirty?
Honestly, man, whatever you can get your hands on. It doesn't matter. Just record. You know, if all you have is your iPhone, start with your iPhone. Just get used to the process. There's no piece of gear that's going to make you professional. It will always come down to the techniques that you use that's going to make you a professional. So don't wait for someone to make you feel qualified because you bought their product. Just use whatever you can get your hands on. I'm happy to give you guys recommendations and brands and things that I like and all that kind of garbage. But at the end of the day, use whatever you can get. If all you can afford is a Zoom recorder, great. Start with a Zoom recorder. Make it happen. But don't let anybody make you feel like you're not a sound designer or you're not a sound recordist because you don't have the gear that they have. That's garbage. Because the reality is that the stuff that I used in that junkyard. Anybody play Halo? What's the vehicle in the very first one? The Warthog, or what's it called? Is it the Warthog? I spent like a half an hour this summer just crashing that thing into the wall. Because every time you did, it was one of the sounds that we recorded in that junkyard. That you ended up using our sounds. My kid walks in the living room. I'm sitting there going, Shabba, Shabba, Shabba. And I'm like running into this wall. He has no idea why I'm doing it. So he just looks at me and is like, my dad does not know how to play video games. Shabba, Shabba. I'm like, this is so cool. Shabba, Shabba. That stuff's ended up in Sons of Anarchy. Like all these like big, television shows and video games and all that stuff. I did that stuff in a spare bedroom at my apartment. And I didn't even have good speakers. I had Altec Lansing speakers. And if you guys aren't familiar with it, it's okay because that's like really cheap computer speakers. They're like the little ones that you buy at Best Buy for like $50. I didn't tell the companies I was providing sound effects for that I couldn't afford the gear at the time. I just told them this is my best stuff. And they used their ears and not their eyes. And they listened to my work and they said, this is really good stuff. In fact, truth be told, and this is the truth, the first company I ever did work with, they called me up. The owner himself personally called me up and said, we've been dealing with guys in Hollywood for over 20 years, and your stuff is by far cleaner than what they're producing. We'd like to hire you to make sound effect libraries. He had no idea. I was just on my computer speakers in my spare bedroom at my apartment. Okay, technique always trumps technology. And that stuff, to this day, the stuff I was recording out of that spare bedroom is still used in movies, video games, and TV shows. So don't let anybody tell you you're not a professional because you don't have a certain piece of gear or a certain piece of software. That's garbage. At the end of the day, they're going to judge your work by what they hear coming out of the speakers. It either sounds good or it doesn't. Duke Ellington is the one who said, if it sounds good, it is good. He was referring to music, but I think that also translates to sound design. It's either good or it's not good. You know what I mean? Slash is Slash, regardless if he's playing on a $10,000 guitar or a $500 guitar. The guy still knows how to play the guitar, right? And I'll have words with anybody who disagrees. All right.
So you're talking a little bit about networking and the professional world. You're kind of a master of branding, personal branding at least. Can you give some insight into how a student just starting out can be perceived on the same level as a professional, and how to build up to that and start networking with professionals?
I think the first thing you guys need to do is you need to grow a soul patch. Ladies, just use gaffer's tape. Works just as well. What was that?
No, soul patch right there.
See, you're so close. You want to be professional? If you're going to send people your resume and then you're going to tell them your name and give them a Facebook link, the last thing we want to see is you doing a keg stand in your underwear. You know what I mean? I've had people apply for internships and stuff, and they send me links to their stuff, and then I'm looking at their pages, and there's like some pretty unprofessional things. So, if you want to be a professional, you're going to have to act like a professional. Some of the things you're going to want to shield from public eyes. Definitely be aware of what you put on Facebook. People do check that stuff. I think that networking is uber important, and I think that, and this just not this industry, but any industry, you just want to treat people with respect. Bad news travels fast, and the way you mistreat other people will travel fast as well. So you treat everybody with respect, and obviously be courteous and be very truthful in your dealings with people, especially when it comes to money and invoicing and all that stuff. Don't overcharge. Don't try to beat people on money or all that kind of stuff. I was always a straight arrow when it came to that stuff when I got started. I treated people with respect. I gave people discounts and deals when I could, but I also charged a fair rate. You don't want to work for free. There's a lot of people that want to do what you guys want to do. A lot of people on this very big planet, and gear is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and more people can afford to do this kind of work. So the market is saturated. There are way more people wanting to do this than there are positions available for people to do this. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. But the good news is this. I can promise you this. If you do your absolute best and you try super hard with all your might and you don't quit, you'll do something. I don't know what it's going to be. It might not be exactly what you wanted to do, but it'll be in that industry or in that field, or it might take you to another path in your career. But the point is this. The people that win are the ones that don't quit. The people that become more proficient are the guys that don't go out on the weekends partying with their friends, and instead they're at home with their nose buried into a manual for a new piece of gear or a new piece of software. Those are the guys that win. The guys that put in the extra time. I wasn't much of a partier, even when I was in school. Like, guys would go out partying, and I would stay home and read the books, or I'd watch movies, or this is what I wanted to do. And I think when you pursue something with all your might and you absolutely throw yourself into it, that's when you see accomplishment. That's when you're going to see yourself get to the next level. It will not come easy. It's going to take effort. When you're on Earth, you're entitled to one thing, and you get one thing only for free, and that's oxygen. Every single thing else on this planet, you're going to have to fight for, or you have to work for, or you're going to have to do something to get it. You got to work for your clothes, for your food, for your shelter. Everything else you've got to fight for. Oxygen is free. So if you really, really want something, you've got to pour yourself into it. And you've got to realize that there are tens of thousands of other people doing the same thing, and you've got to be that much ahead of the game. So there's no room to be lazy, and there's no room to think that you're entitled to anything. You've got to really push hard to get to it. I didn't mean to be really heavy about that, but that's the truth. I mean, that's the reality. You will not find somebody in the Hall of Fame that said, yeah, can't believe I'm here. I got lucky. No. Every single one of these guys, when we sit down and we hang out and we talk, everybody's talking about how we shake our heads. We're like, oh, my gosh, there's so many people that think that this stuff happens just because you got lucky. Not just the Hall of Fame, but just our careers and where we end up. It's like, this is hard work, and it takes a lot, and you got to put yourself into it. I don't mean to sound like it's a negative thing. It's a great thing, and especially if you love what you're doing. Yeah. Me spending my weekends working, I love it. It's what I love to do. I want to do this stuff. You know what I mean? Going out and recording in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning for a blizzard, I was like, woo! I'm excited to go out and do that kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun, but you got to put in the work, And there's no finish line. I thought there was a finish line. I was so stupid. When I first started, I thought, well, eventually I will arrive. No, you don't arrive. You just continue to evolve. There's no point where you're going to go, I'm a professional now. No, you're a professional the moment you say, this is what I want to do, and you start doing it. The moment you keep practice something, boom, you're done. You're there. Now, what's the next step? You just keep evolving into something. You're going to get better, and you're going to get better. My work now sounds amazing compared to the stuff that I did 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But the stuff I'm going to do 10 or 20 years from now is going to sound way more amazing than the stuff I'm doing now. That doesn't mean I quit. It means I just keep trying harder. I'm going to sound better later because I'm going to keep trying now. Does that make sense? Yeah, so you keep pouring yourself into it. It's like, I go back to the illustration of a guitar. I mean, you can have a guitar. That doesn't make you a guitar player. God only knows. You can give me a $500 gift card to Home Depot. Dude, I'm not building a birdhouse. It's not in my skill set. But to have a guitar doesn't make you a guitar player. It's when you whip out the pick, and then you keep playing. And you keep playing, and you keep playing. And I was talking in our earlier panel this morning, the reality of it is this. The first thing that you do, no matter if you're a filmmaker, if you're a sound designer, if you're a musician, or whatever it is that you want to do, anything in the arts, the very first thing you do, I promise you, is going to suck. You might not realize that it sucks at the time. You're like, this is amazing. It will suck. It's going to suck. It has to suck because it's the first thing. You think right out of the gate you're going to nail it. Come on. No, it's not going to happen, right? The second thing you do is going to suck, but it's not going to suck as much as the first time, right? And then you continue until the suck starts to go away and it starts to develop into something, right? And you chip away at it. I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm willing to bet that Michael Jordan probably didn't make his first basket that he ever threw. More than likely he did, just to mock my story. But let's pretend he didn't. The point is that but he's known to be Michael Jordan because of the fact that he makes a lot of baskets. Well, how come he makes a lot of baskets? Because he shoots a lot of balls, right? He just continued to do that. And it's like what you develop and what you practice and what you do over and over again makes you better and better. Does that make sense?
Cool.
I preached a little bit, didn't I?
It went to some deep places.
Did I go
No,
deep
but
there?
It was good. It
I'm
was
sorry.
good.
Are we all with us? Did anybody fall asleep? All right, we're all here. Okay,
No, a few people might be frightened now, but
a little bit.
nah, it's all good. They're here for a reason. So, after all that evolution, I mean, what is the favorite stuff you've worked on that you've gotten, at this point? What do you look back on and say this was my favorite project or sound or moment in my career?
I mean, I certainly got a love for the very first one. The first time I released a sound effects library through a major publisher and I seen my name in the credits, I was like, oh my God, that's so awesome. I was showing my parents. That's definitely a moment. Hearing my work being used in productions is always a gas, especially when if I don't know that it's in the project. Like I'll be watching a movie and I'll be like in the middle of the story and then I hear my sound. That's always cool. Or when I'm playing a video game and that kind of stuff. Lately, it seems the last 5 or 6 years, I think I've reached a point where it's like every single time I release a project, I'm like, this is my new favorite thing I've ever done. And then I get to the next one, and I'm like, no, wait, this is my new favorite thing. So I'm just getting to the point where I'm constantly trying to outdo stuff I've already done, which gets really, really hard because I've done like hundreds of thousands of sound effects now, and it's like, well, now what do I do? So I'm like, well, I got to do something better and something bigger and something different. And it's more challenging, but then when I'm done, there's this like sense of accomplishment, So like when we did Zombie Apocalypse was really cool. I was really proud of that. And then we turned around and we did Heroes and Villains, and I was like, well, now this is a really cool library. So I don't know. I just like to entertain myself, I guess.
Well, the artwork, that's pretty good too.
Yeah, that was Matt Bush did the artwork for those. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, before we head to Q&A, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I mean, I can ramble all day. I'd rather just give you guys question time. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, I think we got to do a microphone.
Oh, yeah. So, you're going to wait for, if you raise your hand, we'll bring the microphone around to you so everyone online can hear what you're asking.
In terms of an aspiring audio post engineer like myself or a sound designer, when you're building your portfolio, what kind of tips can you give in doing so effectively?
Building your portfolio?
Yeah.
I would say a wide variety of things. I've always kind of had an issue when people show me their demo reel, and I'm like, oh my God, that's a really amazing stuff. How did you make that? Like, oh, well, these are sound effect libraries that I own. I'm like, well, that's kind of cheating. I'd rather hear stuff that you've made, especially from a sound design point. Now, if you're doing mixing and things, that's different. Then you just need elements to mix. But I like it when people show me something that I haven't heard before, or they show me something really unique that they made themselves. A great example of this is Saba Wagner. Is that his last name? Saba Wagner? Saba. I call him Saba. He, this was years ago. He did a Toy Story 2, like the first minute or couple of minutes of it. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. It was a sound redesign. Have you guys heard of sound redesigns? I'm not sure if Saba did Saba start that?
I don't know.
He was the first one I've ever seen anybody do it, but he basically redid all of the sound design for like the first few minutes of Toy Story 2. And he sent me a link. This was when he was first starting out. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, where did you make all this stuff? And he's like, in my apartment. Like, he never left his apartment. He made like all the sounds from like Toy Story 2, like that whole action sequence with Buzz Lightyear when he goes to the planet and there's like all the little green guys and all that stuff. It's pretty involved sequence, but he made all that stuff without leaving his apartment. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's how you get noticed. That's something different. That's something that caught my attention. And sure enough, I mean, that guy he was at Soundalux, which just went out. Where is he at now? He's at Famosa Group in LA, and he's doing amazing things. He's working on like, great video games like Resident Evil and stuff like that. And so, but he got there because of the fact that he did something really amazing and really remarkable. So you have to realize, again, the market is saturated. So there's a lot of people shooting out resumes and a lot of people sending out demo reels. What's going to make yours unique? That's going to make me notice you versus the next person or the person next to them. Yeah. Does that help? Okay. Yes.
Hey Rick, it's Kevin again.
Hey, what's going on, man?
You can't see me, right? Yeah.
I can see you now.
What advice would you give for like those starting out? Like, let's say we just have a Zoom and we go out to do field recording. What field recording techniques in general do you use to get that clean, isolated sound? Yeah, just
When it comes to isolation, there's a few things. One is you want to find good locations to record in. So if the location is noisy, try to pick a different location. If the sound that you're after is only at that location, then that's when you got to get a little tricky with it. Then you got to figure out ways to get a cleaner sound. One technique that I use is I get the microphone closer to the sound source because it makes it further away from the background noise and it makes the sound source more prevalent. That's one trick. Isolating background noise as much as possible. So, for example, if we're to record in this room, near the projector and air conditioning units, then you want to isolate those things. You know, turn the units off or do whatever. So do what you can. Treat the environment to try to eliminate the background noise. Get the mics as close as you can without distorting the sound, obviously. But close to the sound source. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Do you have any good tips?
Microphone choice.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Mike. Well, I was going.
I mean,
He said
you only have a
he said
Zoom.
he only had a Zoom. I mean, if you have a choice, then you want to go to different mics and then dial in your pattern that way. Maybe go with a shotgun mic or something like that. But if you only have a Zoom recorder, then you're kind of limited.
A lot of times I'll try to, if I'm limited to something like that, I'll actually try to block a sound with my body. So if there's a sound coming over here, I'll put myself in between what I'm recording and.
I've done that too, where I've on location and I'm like, oh my God, I need to block this sound, so I'll have Colin come out and stand.
Yeah, he has me on call all the time. I'll just fly out to the truck. Can you stand here?
Colin, I need you ASAP. No, but acoustic shadowing is basically what you're doing is you're creating a shadow in front of the sound source that you don't want to have. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Hi, I have a question from the online live feed from Ian Hardingen, a ShowPro student online, I believe, and he wants to know, how hard was it for you to track down the sounds that you have needed?
I'm sorry?
How hard was it to track down the sounds that you've needed?
How hard was it to track down the sounds that I've needed? Yes?
Yes, that was the question.
It's kind of an open-ended question.
Some sounds are harder than others.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is you networking, asking friends or family, see if someone's got something unique. Prop shops are great places to go to. Theater places are great places to go to for props. We went to one Saginaw Valley University. They had a theater department, and they let me come in and record their props. I'm like, oh, great. So we go in the prop room, which was really massive. Dude, they had like electric typewriters, and then they had like the manual typewriters, and then like all these antiques and all these kind of things. So it's like, oh my God, dude, this would take me months to find all of this stuff, and it was housed in one place. So little things like that, finding, lots of props in one location certainly saves you the headache, but a lot of it is just looking around. Sometimes I'll make notes on my phone if I'm driving by something and I hear something, a cool sound, or I'm walking nearby someplace and I don't have a recorder on me. I'm like, oh, I got to remember to record something like that. Another thing is to carry a Zoom recorder. I usually travel with the Zoom because sometimes I'm in hotel rooms and you get like the really coolest sounds out of the air conditioning units or the elevators or just any sound that I'm near I want to grab or sample. Sometimes it's the noise, the background is so noisy that I know I can't use it, but it's something I want to try to emulate for myself later. I'm like, okay, like I heard like a fire alarm go off once and it had this really cool sound, but there was all this construction noise and things in the background. I'm like, I'll never be able to use this. So I just grabbed my iPhone and just sampled it that way with a video camera or whatever and recorded it. And then I went back to the studio and tried to recreate something like that. But finding sounds to record is much easier than finding good places to record them. The place to record in, that's the challenge. That hands down is the hardest thing for me, is finding quiet locations to record because the world gets noisier and noisier every year. Yeah.
All right, another one from Jacob Jordan, a show production major. I guess similar to what you just said, but what is the most difficult part of being a field recorder?
Yeah, hands down, background noise is the most difficult part. Next to people coming up to you and asking you stupid questions while you're recording.
Are you
I
from the
hate-
news?
Yeah, are you
All the
shooting a
time.
video? Like, dude, this is not a camera. But yeah. But typically
Smile and nod.
what I do, no, actually, no, I don't smile and I don't nod because I don't like people. But what I do is I just don't look. I just keep my eyes down when they're less likely to talk to you. But the moment you make eye contact, they smile. Hey, what are you doing? So I'm just like, go away. I'm not looking at you. And then eventually they leave. I need to get a hat that just says, be quiet, I'm recording. But then you know what's going to happen? Oh, really? What you recording? Well, nothing now. I'm like, you just wrecked my take. That happens a lot. You know, I should... But you know what? This is a true story. Like last week, I did the same thing to somebody else, and I felt like an idiot. I was pulling into my subdivision, and some guy was sitting there shooting a video. I don't even know what he was shooting it for, but I was like, I didn't know who he was, and I didn't know a lot of the shooters in the area, so I rolled up my window. I said, hey, who you shooting for? And then I realized I was that guy. I'm like, I'm the guy. I should know better than to stop him from working and asking him that question. And he just kind of looked at me, and they gave me the look, and I'm like, I shouldn't have asked that. And I just kept driving. Sorry, dude.
Yes, in your book you mentioned respecting copyrights. What do you do to make sure your stuff is protected and licensed correctly?
Make sure that the stuff that you're recording is protected?
What do you do to make sure your stuff is copyrighted? You know, when you're doing like a lot of sound effects and putting them on a library, you know, as opposed to somebody's doing like an album, they just have 12 songs, they go to ASCAP, whatever, and they
Right.
register in those 12 songs. What do you do with such a mass of songs? How do you copyright those?
Yeah, I copyright the libraries themselves. So that covers every sound that's in the library versus, I mean, if I had to copyright each one individually, it would take forever. But yeah, I just...
Broke.
Yeah, exactly. So you just copyright it as one big work. Yeah. There are some sound design stuff that I've done that is registered through ASCAP, but that's a very small portion of what I've done. Very, very small. Yeah.
As far as doing sound design, do you ever find yourself working with like digital instrumentation and adding that as well?
Yeah, like very rarely. I use it sparingly just because I'm a big organic sound guy, so I'd rather use real world stuff. But there's sometimes where I'll use like a synth for something. But usually when I use the synth, you're not going to know that it was a synth by the time I'm finished manipulating it. So to me, I start off with, I don't mind I don't care what the sound source is. I'm more like what the end result is. So I'll use like cheap sounds, like little simple sounds, or I'll use like synth sounds or whatever. But by the time I'm done and I've totally mangled it, you don't know what the original sound was. Yeah.
Thank you. What do you do as far as, do you have like a go-to template when it comes to labeling and categorizing your sound effects? Like as far as file naming goes, so you keep everything organized?
Yeah, I have categories that I try to put everything in, and to be fair, those categories have changed over the years. They just because it's like you're cataloging the world. Now you got everything from like a microwave door to like a car door to then a machine gun. And it's like, well, what are these things? What categories do they fall into? And you can't have too many categories because then it's like takes you forever to find anything. So I'm trying to like narrow it down to, I think we got 25 or 26 categories that we think everything kind of fits into. And sometimes those names change, but in general I have categories that have like staples, like ambiances, and you've got drones, and you've got, you know, impacts, and you've got, you know, weapons and things like that. When it comes to naming the files, I typically go noun, then verb, or action. So noun, the prop, whatever it is, then the action, and then I get into descriptive sounds, adjectives. And we've actually just we're going through the Blast Wave catalog, the entire catalog of 65,000 sounds. And we're going through every single one of those sounds, and we're redoing the metadata for every one. And we're cleaning them up as best as we can so that everything is completely uniform, and we're doing it the best that we possibly can. So that makes sense. So what we found is we go the prop, then the action, and then anything else that falls after that. Yeah.
The tricky thing I'll mention about metadata is you're not just sticking in like, oh, what this is. Because, you know, as a sound designer, you might be thinking, oh, I need a swoosh or a swish or a whoosh or all these different, slightly different variations or what it could be. And you kind of have to think in those terms as well and add all that in that metadata as well.
Yeah, you have to think of what other people are going to look for as well. And so part of that process for us is we're going through and we're actually making like a little bit of a, I don't know if glossary is the right word for it, but we're going to put together some kind of documentation that says, look, guys, when we say this, this is what we're referring to. And that way, hopefully, that will help the end user find the sounds the faster, I guess. But the idea is I don't know what you're going to call it. Or like what he just said with whooshes and swooshes and whatever it is going to be, pass-bys. I don't know what you're going to call it, so I have to call it as many things as I think is possible. And the problem that we found is that we did that initially, and we called it everything. Well, then the problem was then you would, like everything was getting cross-referenced and then getting pulled up, and it wasn't easy to refine your search. So that's why we went through and said, all right, we've got to kind of really narrow it down so that people are getting exactly what they want when they search for the sounds. Yeah.
Hi. I was thinking, have you guys ever recorded like a big sound, like an explosion or like heavy weapons, and what would be like the best technique for it, or would it be easier just to emulate it?
I don't know. I mean, you kind of emulate it, but nothing beats the real thing. Actually, that's not really true. Sometimes it's better to emulate. But when I record guns and explosions or things that I know that are going to be just massive and big, I tend to use multiple mics. Sometimes I'll use pads on the mics so that they don't clip. Other times on some of the tracks, and on other tracks I'll let it clip and see what we get. Sometimes I let it clip on a track because I'm not going to use the initial attack at all. I just want the decay. But if I lower it, lower down my volume or bring down my gain so that I don't clip, what happens is I'm bringing down the decay, and then I get noise and all that kind of stuff. So I'll do it where I'll have like one mic's I'm going to use for the attack, and then another one I'll just open it up, and then just so I can get the decay, and then I just mix and blend the two together. So yeah, and then different mics, different mic placement, things like that. Yeah, but I really like I think when I do a gun shoot, I typically have like 16 mics up that we record. Yeah. So we get it from like every possible angle, and we've got multiple, like sometimes I'll double mic it. I'll put the exact same kind of mic in the exact same position, but I'll open one up and then one I'll just put a pad on it, and then I can use those and mix those together as well. So, cover your bases, I guess. Yeah. Do you have any? You probably got some good things out there.
I mean, it is interesting because, like you were saying, sometimes emulating it is better. I mean, a big explosion, especially like the stuff you see in Hollywood with all the fire and everything, that kind of sounds more like a whoosh than an explosion. Those are more effects. To get an explosion that sounds like an explosion in Hollywood, you have to have, technicians, and you have ridiculous amounts of land, and it's really hard to record that stuff. So most of that's pitched down or manipulated other things. I think the biggest thing I've done was Civil War cannons. We had 26 mics on that one, from everywhere from inches from the cannons to 2,000 feet away, just to get your perspectives nailed down. But yeah, it's all about multiple mics, understanding how the mics work, understanding how the limiters on your recorders or mixers work, all that kind of stuff. But that gets pretty complicated. We could do a whole entire session just on that.
Over here, I just wanted to ask, as a student, I sometimes find it difficult to study the tech to the best of my ability and also network. So I just wanted to ask, for us right now, what would you say is more important, to study the tech or to network as much as possible?
To study?
Technology. Technology versus networking.
Well, while you're at school, study. If I'm understanding the question.
My thought would be, well, you're in school. I mean, why not just do both? The networking doesn't take a lot of time, like per day. It's kind of a long game, and it's a slow process every day. Even if you spend 15, 20 minutes a day doing it, you can eventually work up with that, especially with Twitter. And in this industry, Twitter and Facebook are the two big ones. You can find all sorts of people on those two. And then the tech, it's really rare when somebody's not going to hire you because you don't know the tech, because you can always get trained on the tech. But if you know the tech, it's only going to help you. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Obviously, you want to do well in your classes and everything, but the tech has never been a big issue as far as hiring.
Yeah, I mean, while you're here, I would definitely pour myself into just learning anything and everything. So I've said this before, but it's so true. Schools are like gyms, right? So you can have a gym membership, and that doesn't mean you're going to lose weight or that you're going to gain muscle, because you could stand in the middle of the gym all day long and not get on the treadmill or not lift the weights. It doesn't do anything for you. So when you're at school, it's just like being at a gym. You will get out of the gym what you put into the gym. You will get out of school what you put into school. And so I think the focus right now is you've got access to a lot of gear, a lot of technology, and a lot of teachers that are dying to show you what they know. Milk it for all it's worth, because your time at school will go by so fast. It might not seem like it when you're in the middle of school, but once you're done and you're out in the real world, you're like, oh, you're going to want to go back for just a few more months. But, milk the opportunity for all it's worth while you can. This school produced people that will win awards, Grammys and Oscars, etc. And they also are going to produce people that are going to end up working at a gas station pumping your gas. Okay, that's not Full Sail's fault, because obviously both people had access to the same level of education. You get out of school what you put into it. So while you're here, man, milk it for all it's worth. But that said, it's important to network, but sometimes the networking that you need to do right now is just treat people with respect and make friends. Because it might not be 5 or 10 years down the road before you end up really needing to use that network. When I went to school here, it was maybe 5 or 10 years after I got out before I really started pulling strings with people that I went to school with, and needed to use that network. But we had a good friendship that we remembered from our time here, and I fall back on that. Yeah.
Hi. So I wanted to get a picture of a day in the life of a sound designer. So could you briefly describe a busy day for you?
Start off with coffee. Maybe a second cup. Well, it's different because I'm not your typical sound designer. I think that's a question probably better suited for probably David Farmer or somebody. But for what I do, I make noise. That's like what I do. I make noise. I make sound effects. So for me, my life is pretty. It's pretty all over the map because I wear so many hats. But when I'm in the process of making a sound effect library, I go through phases. So the first phase is we decide what we're going to make in terms of sound effects, what the category is going to be, and then we decide on a list of things that we want to record. Then we actually go out and record those things. Then we come back, and then we have a whole season of where we just edit the sounds, and then we have a season where we go through and master the sounds. So my life is a little bit different than I guess a typical sound designer. So I guess that's my way of saying I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that question. Yeah. Did that help? Yeah, you're good. Okay.
I had a question about actually editing the sounds that you get. I noted that you said something about manipulating the sound. I know personally I use Audacity because that's what we had to use for a class that we take. Is there a specific software or DAW that you use, and what are some tips for manipulating sounds?
As far as software, man, use whatever you're comfortable with. It all sounds the same in the end. It's just manipulating ones and zeros. So there's not like one. It's not like a piece of gear where it's like this recorder sounds better than this recorder. It's software, so it just handles ones and zeros. So from that standpoint, I say use what you're comfortable with. Me personally, I've always been a fan of SoundForge. I've edited and mastered every single sound effect I've ever done has came out of SoundForge. It's my favorite program. What was the second part of the question?
Tips on manipulating sound.
That's a pretty open-ended question. You want to give me another? You want to follow that up with something a little more specific? I can talk all day about manipulating.
What are some of your favorite effects and stuff to put on?
Some of my favorite effects. I love pitch layering. That's one of my favorite things to do, where I'll take a track and then I'll duplicate it like 5 or 6 times, and then so I've got the exact same thing playing 6 different times, but then I'll pitch shift each one a little bit differently. Sometimes I'll do it where they're in tune musically, and sometimes I'll do it where it's a musical, right? And then sometimes I'll do it in sync. Sometimes I'll have it out of sync. Sometimes I'll play it backwards, and I'll manipulate, and then I just kind of go with it from there. Sometimes I'll take all of that, and then I'll cut them up, and then I'll just take a sample of each one, like not a sample, but a section of each one, and then I'll drag them all onto one track and have them cross-fade into each other. So I just, anything and everything. I probably do stuff you're not supposed to do, but which I'll take a sound and I'll reverse it, and then I'll add reverb to it, and then I'll reverse it again, and then I'll add even more reverb to it, and I'll do that like 3 or 4 times, and then I pitch it way down, and I create like these really cool drones and stuff. Yeah. I remember when I first started making this stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds really cool. I remember thinking to myself, but this can't be the right way to be doing this. But I was like, but I bet no one else is doing it. And I would do it, and I would show it to people, and they're like, we want to buy this stuff. And I'm like, it works. So I don't know. I know. I have no rules. I really will try anything to see if it works.
To tag on to the answer to the software question, if you want to be doing this kind of stuff, if you want to be making crazy sounds, use whatever software you want. If you want to be working in television, there's a lot of flexibility there. Like Frank Schuring, who's here this week, is a big Fairlight guy. You're a SoundForge guy. I'm a Pro Tools guy. There's a lot of really good software out there. If you want to be in the Hollywood world and you want to work on the next Avengers or the next whatever big blockbuster movie, you have to know Pro Tools, because that's not a guy like Rick sitting in a room making a movie. It's a team of up to 20 people all working together on different parts of different sessions, and it all has to work together and then get to the dubbing stage. So if you want to go that route, you have to know Pro Tools. And when you're not working in that environment, go branch out and explore other software as well, because there's a lot of stuff that Pro Tools can't do. What it's really good at doing is integrating with multiple instances of itself. So learn Pro Tools and then explore with everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to be in the sound design world, especially for film and television, you got to know Pro Tools. But the stuff that I do, I don't interface with anybody else. I just do my own thing, and then I deliver, for all intents and purposes, I'm just delivering WAV files, so I can use anything I want. So, and I do.
All right. I have a question from Sarah Strauss. What advice would you have for students trying to get their start as a sound effects producer for movies post-production? Also, is it a common technique to record the same sound with different types of microphones?
Simultaneously? Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, not all the time, but there are certain sounds. But at the same time, why not? Yeah. Sorry, if that's probably
especially
really
when you're getting into guns and loud things, cars, you'll have multiple different types of mics for different aspects of the sound, and you'll mix them together later.
Yeah, when I'm out in the field, I typically use a single mic. Like if I'm just on the go, I'll use like a shotgun or whatever. And then, but when I'm in the studio, sometimes I'll set up multiple mics just because I'm in the studio, and why not? I might have a shotgun even though I'm in a studio. I might have a shotgun. I might have a large diaphragm, and I might have a small diaphragm, like a pencil mic or something. I might have like multiple mics set up, and I've done this before. And then sometimes when I'm editing it, I'll just listen to them like, this one sounds better. And, believe it or not, you can find, like, even if there's just like a foot difference or a few inches, there's pitch differences sometimes, just a little bit, but there's a little bit of something there. And especially when I'm doing like crash stuff, or we're throwing debris and stuff around the room, sometimes you hit the mic. Well, if you got multiple mics, then it's like, well, it's okay. I'll just use this mic for that one part or for the entire thing. So from that standpoint, if I have it and I'm in the studio, it doesn't cost me anything to throw out the extra mics. Just for kicks.
What was the first half of that question?
First set was something about being a sound effects producer.
What advice would you give for a student trying to be a sound effects producer for a movie's post-production?
For a movie's post-production?
For a movie's post-production.
I assume that's talking about recording for a movie or...
What advice would I give? Communicate for sure with whoever's hiring you to record whatever it is that they want. Make sure that you know exactly what they're looking for. Over-deliver. Always over-deliver. Give them multiple variations. Make sure you slate everything that you do. If you can't slate at the front, like, okay, this is going to be this, Make sure you slate at the end of it, and be very detailed about what you're slating so that when you finally deliver the material, they know exactly what you've got.
I would even say that for your own material.
Well,
I can't tell you how many
absolutely,
times
yeah.
I've recorded something and found it a year later and said, I have no idea what this is.
I had an intern once who recorded gun foley for me. He went to the sheriff's department and he recorded like 2 or 3 hours of like all the guns, you know, the locking and the mechanisms and all that stuff, and he didn't slate a single thing. It's like, okay, this is a, you know, I don't know what it was, MP5. And all of a sudden I just heard like all these like noises, and I had no idea what any of the stuff was. And so I had to send him back a second time. I'm like, dude, that didn't work, man. You got to slate every single thing, you know. Because, you know, the chamber opening sounds different than the chamber closing. But I don't know if that's it opening or closing, or you got to tell me up front. So just make sure you're really detailed about your slates. Yeah, I get lazy sometimes myself, and I catch myself. I burn myself on it. But I just keep reminding myself, make sure that you overslate everything you do and be as detailed as possible. Yeah.
Okay. Here's a question from another online student. Besides the market being saturated, is this typically a fun environment as an audio file?
Is it a fun environment?
Do
you mean in terms of like a community of recorders?
I have fun.
I have fun. Yes. Settled. Chapa.
That's why I do what I do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it started off as a hobby, and it just kind of I don't know. Just money
for me, it started out as a hobby too, and I turned it into, okay, how can I make money doing what I like?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yes.
Yes.
And a question from Joe Adams, a recording arts student. What type of environment would be best for recording gunshots, and what would be the process of getting a session like that going?
Safety first.
Safety first. For me, recording guns, a gunshot is determined, the sound of a gunshot is determined by the location that you record it in. So if you record it in a forest, it's going to sound very thin, very bright, and very weak. You record it out in the desert, you're going to get a little bit more fuller sound. You record it near a hillside, anything around it's going to affect the shape of the sound. So, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, it's just going to shape your sound. I've done stuff that has been near woods, but the woods were way off in the distance, but I got really cool trail offs with it. And I've done other stuff in very large open areas that's just sounded amazing as well. So just keep it in mind that the environment that you're recording in is going to shape the sound. What was the second part of the question?
How
much does it cost?
How do you get it started? How would you get the ball rolling on doing something like that?
Well, you find a place, and then you find people with guns that are willing to let you. No.
No, that's true though.
Obviously, you have to do that. But the thing is that it's expensive to. Yeah, it's expensive to. Well, yes, you don't want you don't want to just pick some random guy in the street going, "You got a gun? You want to come out in the field with me in the middle of the night?"
Well, no, but you also don't want to. You don't want to pick your friend who has a collection of guns who's like, "Oh yeah, look at this," you know. You got to have people that are professionals around the guns, because it has to be a very structured session for safety reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. So you find people with guns, or you rent them. But like he said, safety is paramount, because it's like, oh hey, let me go check out this mic, and then all of a sudden you're missing a finger. So when we work, we have nobody crosses the line of, nobody walks past the shooter, as it were. If we do, we make sure that the guns are unloaded. And there's a whole set, safety procedures that you go through. But the cost of shooting guns really comes down to ammunition, and ammunition is getting more and more expensive. So you got to pay for the bullets. That's really where the cost comes in. Generally, you can get people, or you can work. If you get into a guy that's a really big gun enthusiast, he knows somebody who knows somebody. I work with police departments all the time. That gives me access to fully automatic weapons and all things like that they pull off the street, or stuff that they're using for the SWAT teams. And then safety doesn't become an issue because they're professionals. So they just tell me, stay over here, and I just do my thing. So typically what we do is we just run all our mics, set everything up before they even bring out their guns. And once we've got everything where we need it, we'll do a couple of test shots, and we'll play back, make sure we're getting what we're looking for, and that all the mics are in the right places. And then typically from there, we don't Typically from there we don't make much adjustments. But then they'll bring out like, a pistol is going to be mic'd a little bit different than a shotgun versus or a rifle. And so at that point we'll shut down the session, tweak the mics as we need it, and then bring out the guns again. So was that the wrap up? Is that what that was? All right.
All right, well, thanks everybody for attending. Thanks to Rick for being here. And everybody have a great day and be safe.